Hello, I'm Wade Allison, Professor of Physics at Oxford University, recently retired, and I've researched and taught students all my life there for 40 years, motivated really by wanting to understand rather than building up political or contractual links of any kind. In 2006, I wrote a book called Fundamental Physics for Probing and Imaging, and it's a textbook. But as a result of writing that, I became very concerned that the way radiation is looked at in medicine and in health is a completely different level to the way it's looked at in the environment. And this difference has caused pointless suffering at Chernobyl at that time. So in 2009, I wrote another book, a popular book designed for everybody to be able to read, called Radiation and Reason, The Impact of Science on a Culture of Fear. And that was 2009, and that went very well. In 2011, of course, the Fukushima accident occurred, and unfortunately the mistakes of Chernobyl that I had written about were repeated, and very shortly after that, I'm glad to say, my book was translated and published in Japanese. And I visited and lectured in Japan in 2011 and 2013. I'm doing this because I have a very encouraging message to give to Japan and a lot of other people. And I'm often asked why nobody else is giving that same kind of message. But I'm aware that many people know what I'm saying, but are not able in a position to say it. But because I'm retired and have no political or commercial associations, and I'm a nuclear and medical physicist, I'm in a position to come to my own conclusions, not to rely over much on others and take things back to first principles. What I have to say is based on my own knowledge. They're my summary of the situation, and as such they're quite unrelated to any view of the British government or any commercial operation. I am a founder member of the SARI group, international SARI group of over 100 professionals who are worldwide, who are deeply concerned about the current misunderstanding and misuse of the science of nuclear radiation, and so they do have ideas very similar to mine. As well as shelter, food and water, civilization needs energy and mutual trust if it's to be able to support a sizable population. Both of these, energy and mutual trust, have been damaged by what happened at Fukushima in 2011, both as a result of official and reactions by the public. And this can't be justified in science. The choice of nuclear power is similar to similar advance made many years ago. When plants get energy, they get it from the sun, and animals get energy by eating food, and burning or digesting it inside. In a crucial step in the development of man on this planet, mankind started burning fuel outside his body. By studying fire, he learnt to control it and take it into his home. It gave immediate superiority over all the other animals, and it enabled him to cook and to heat his home and to live a much more comfortable and productive life. No doubt there were environmental protesters, and they were right, because fire is very dangerous and it costs many lives. Fortunately for civilization, those protesters lost the battle, and man continued to study nature and benefit from his findings. Today we have a new fire, nuclear energy, 1,000,000 times more powerful than conventional fire, but very much safer. Unlike their predecessors, today's protesters are completely unjustified. They are simply wrong. Nuclear technology is quite safe, and the Fukushima accident has shown that. In March 2011, in Japan, there were 3 distinct events. The first was an exceptional natural disaster, with massive destruction and nearly 20,000 lives lost. The second event was the resulting destruction of 3 nuclear reactors and the escape of an amount of radioactivity into the environment. However, this caused not a single death or even significant hospital admission. This was only an accident, it wasn't a disaster. And the third thing that happened was an artificial, self-inflicted, worldwide panic, which lasted over 3.5 years and has caused a loss of trust in society, a severe social stress, significant loss of life, over 1,000 deaths, great cost to the Japanese economy, massive increase in carbon emissions, all without benefit of any kind, except possibly to foreign fossil fuel providers. The excellent education and informative guidance about earthquakes given to Japanese children and citizens enabled them to optimize their reaction to the real disaster. It was amazing. It was brilliant. No other nation in the world would have been able to react to the tsunami, to the earthquake and tsunami, with the effectiveness that the Japanese people did, because they know about it. But when it came to the radiation, there was no knowledge, there was no experience, there were no plans, either by the authorities or the people, with disastrous results. This failure is not a Japanese problem, it was worldwide. The panic and lack of education in nuclear was something that every nation, each nation, reacted to with its own local historical terms. This complete misjudgment raises many questions. In physics, in reactors, in biology, in medicine, in sociology, economics, politics and philosophy. But here are just 3. How safe is nuclear radiation? Secondly, how is it possible to build popular trust in nuclear safety? And thirdly, who still says that nuclear is very dangerous, and why? To talk about safety, we need to have numbers and measurements. These are the details that children and students should learn about in schools. Doses, energy measured in energy per energy absorbed per kilogram, that is in millisieverts, and radioactivity rates in becquerels. None of these things are difficult, but they're a bit tedious in an address like this. So we'll skip over the details here. As the data will confirm, it's actually the dose rate that is important. A dose, a radioactive dose, radiation dose, spread out in time to a low rate might as well not be there because of the evolved biological reaction, which has plenty of time to correct it. 2 points before we look at some data. The first is that nuclear is 70 years old, and in its medical applications it's 110 years old. So, although there are always technical advances and improvements to be made, it's not an immature technology. There is no need for special pleading of precaution, which certainly applies when you have a new technology where not as much is known. The second point I'd like to make is that we will concentrate on higher exposures of radiation to larger numbers of people. If these are shown to be safe, then data exposures, accidents with smaller numbers of people and smaller doses are not more unsafe. A radiation exposure may be either a single flash, like was emitted by the bomb at Hiroshima, or like you get from a dental X-ray on a different scale, a dental X-ray or a CT scan. Or it can be an ongoing chronic radiation, a dose rate from an internal radioactive source inside your body or from the natural background. Either of these, the ongoing and the acute, may cause, first of all, it might cause early death by widespread cell failure. This is called acute radiation syndrome. Or it can cause cancer in later years, which is what people often worry about. Or it might cause health failure in later generations, which they also worry about. Although notably, this has never been seen in humans and is only to be observed in Hollywood and in the pages of thrillers. So let's put that one out. There may also be, of course, non-fatal diseases, but statisticians find that death certificates provide a much more firm basis for concluding what's going on than looking at other marginal health conditions. There is sufficient mature evidence to study all of these, in particular from Chernobyl for an acute exposure, from the Goiânia accident, which I'm going to tell you about, for a chronic dose. Then, thirdly, from lifelong cases of ingested radium, plutonium and other alpha emitters. And finally, from a century of the use of radiation in clinical medicine for people's health. Moderate doses are used in diagnostic imaging, but doses typically 200 times larger are used to healthy parts of the body in radiotherapy. And all of these data, all of this information, has to be looked at and understood in the context of biology, that is, how life works. Life has evolved ways in which to protect itself from damage and cope with the damage if it occurs. That, after all, is what life is all about. In the context of radiation and other oxidative attack, its methods include neutralizing broken molecules, that is to say, hot radicals. You may have heard of antioxidants, that's what that is meant to be about, mending DNA breaks, replacing cells, and immunity, that is to say, rejecting any cell that doesn't look like one of ours. But this protection may be overwhelmed, it may not work, at high dose rates. And when it fails, what we need to know is, what is the threshold for failure? At what dose rate does this natural protection fail? Let's look at the evidence. Let's look first at the Chernobyl data, in particular the Chernobyl firefighters who went in and put out the fire early on. They were irradiated very heavily in a day or two. The crosses on this slide show the mortality from ARS in each dose range. There is a clear threshold, somewhere around 2000 millisieverts, for such early death. The curve shows similar data for rats, with many more examples, and what's important is perhaps that in the following 25 years after Chernobyl, some survivors died, but not necessarily, not of particularly radiation-related causes. As far as Hiroshima is concerned, early data on ARS are not available for obvious reasons. Studies show that most initial casualties died of blast and fire. The radiation was an acute flash from the bomb with little chronic dose. There was no evidence for later cancer deaths for doses below 100 to 200 millisieverts. Above that, there were leukemia and solid cancers. Next we come to the Goiânia incident. The Goiânia accident gives evidence for large internal doses with chronic effects spread out over months and years. In Brazil, a redundant radiotherapy dose, 50 million becquerels, to put that in, of cesium-137. Cesium-137 is the same isotope as escaped at Fukushima, and therefore this is particularly important. Anyway, this source went into a family home. The children enjoyed the blue glow that it emitted. They painted their skin. They got it in the kitchen and food. They invited in the neighbours to look at this extraordinary thing. They sold it to somebody else, and then some became ill. 249 of them were contaminated, and in 6 weeks, 4 of them died of acute radiation syndrome, like the people at Chernobyl. And the activity they had inside them was 100 million becquerels. 28 had surgery for burns on their arms and legs and so on, but survived. One woman with an activity of 200,000 becquerels was already 4 months pregnant, but she had a healthy but radioactive child. Another with an activity of 300 million becquerels, that is to say, more activity than some of those who did die, became pregnant 3 years and 8 months later, but also had a healthy child. In the 25 years since the accident, there have been no further deaths that are considered likely to be related to radiation. Of course, some people died, but not of cancer. But there are professional reports of radiation-induced fear and stress, just as there were at Chernobyl and Fukushima. If there were time, I could look at data on radium and radon and plutonium and other alpha emitters. These are absorbed in rather slightly different ways, but it's still true that a threshold of about 1 gray, that is to say more than 1,000 millisieverts per year, is the threshold at which any fatalities or other diseases have been detected. As a matter of interest, in 1934, the year that Mary Curie died, the safety threshold was set at the equivalent of 730 millisieverts per year, almost exactly what I'm talking about. And I think one can say that it has only been changed, and it has been changed by a large factor, it's only been changed subsequently for political and other non-scientific reasons. I'm going to talk to you about medical doses. And it's important to realize that there has been amazing progress over the years, particularly in medical care in Japan and USA, Germany, and in other countries, based in large part on the work of Mary Curie and others. And to note that a diagnostic scan dose, that is to say from CT or SPECT or PET or the other kinds of radiation doses that you can get, is less than 1% of what you get from a radiotherapy course. And a course of radiotherapy uses a very large dose on members of the public to kill a tumour on purpose. That's what it's for. But the dose received by the tissue round the tumour may be half as much as the tumour itself receives. So that's also very high. That is 15 times, over a period of a month, 15 times what the workers at Chernobyl found to be fatal. But it's spread over 4 to 6 weeks. Every day, more tumour cells die, and every day in the treatment, healthy cells just manage to not die and recover. The standard safety criterion that the radiation dose should be kept as low as reasonably achievable, ALARA as it's called, ignores this recovery. Without this recovery, radiotherapy would be fatal. And millions of people all over the world have personal experience of the efficacy of this recovery mechanism for their own health. We can illustrate the position graphically with monthly doses represented by areas. Pictures are important, even in science. The red circle is the fatal monthly dose to the tumour. The yellow is a dose tolerated by patients to healthy tissue with a few % chance of introducing a new cancer, a loss of hair, a burn, but usually recoverable, and usually the patients go away and say thank you. So this is not something hidden in some government nuclear research lab. This is something that a lot of people have a personal experience of. As high as relatively safe, AHA's level, is the green circle, conservatively 200 times smaller than the yellow one that we've just been talking about. There are no known risks at this dose rate, which is 100 millisieverts per month, and this is suggested as a conservative, safe threshold. If it had been used at Fukushima, there would have been no evacuation after the first couple of weeks, no food destruction, no social stress, no additional deaths, and so on. But it's 1,000 times the official UN-blessed standard ALARA rate, that is 1 millisievert per year, shown as the tiny area of the tiny black spot in the green one. The conclusion is that standard safety is unjustifiably strict by a factor of about 1,000, and great pain has been caused by its use in Fukushima, as it was also at Chernobyl. So we come to our second question. How can we build popular trust in nuclear? First, as we've already seen, people should realize that they're much more familiar with radiation than they think they are. It's here, in sunshine and life-saving medical treatment. Radioactivity is natural. Inside us, in onsen and spas. Secondly, people should realize that studying radiation is not hard, but needs public lectures and a little bit of private reading by some people with advice. How about some advice from famous and respected authorities, with confidence, from academic science and medicine, not commercial industry. People should make measurements to reassure and do simple calculations. As I've said, some of those can be done at school, for instance, for food and water. We should discuss waste and reprocessing. They should learn a bit more about internal radiation and why it is safer than radiation that is shone in acutely. And they should discuss why people have different views and where they go wrong. So now I'm going to look at each of those ideas. Sunshine is radiation, but most of it can't break chemical bonds, so it can't wreak the havoc that ultraviolet can. Ultraviolet, which sits in the spectrum between sunlight and X-rays, can break molecules, and does, and on holiday, as we all know, if you have too much sunshine, two things can happen. One is you will get sunburn, and the cells of your skin will die and they will peel off, but you'll recover from that. That is cell death. And the other thing that can happen is that years later you can get skin cancer. Exactly parallel with the situation with the other parts of the radiation spectrum. Of course, we should cancel holidays and take our summer holidays deep underground. Maybe we would take them in the winter only, if we were still worried. But with sense, with care, we can manage our natural protection, and we do, and enjoy sunny holidays with the children where we give them a good advice as well. It would be good if we could take a similar attitude to nuclear radiation, to low-dose X-rays and other radiation. We should remind people of the life-giving benefits of medical radiation. Japanese healthcare is as good as any in the world. The radiation is exactly the same as the radiation in the environment. We need to establish respect and trust. Where are they to be found? Well, we're not the only people who have a problem establishing respect and trust with the public. Bankers need to, for good reason. And what do? They put pictures of great scientists and thinkers on banknotes, and some other people as well, to add gravitas to those grubby pieces of paper that they sell us. Well, we should do likewise. Here are a few. Marie Curie, of course. She's appeared on both Polish and French banknotes. Charles Darwin, naturally. Florence Nightingale, of whom more later. Adam Smith, the natural philosopher and economist. They speak with one voice about not being afraid. Adam Smith would see fear of radiation as pure superstition, as dangerous and irrational as fear of an economic bubble or a stampede. Marie Curie and Florence Nightingale agree. A recent Egyptian Nobel laureate puts it succinctly: fear does not prevent death, it prevents life. And what did Florence Nightingale actually do? She was a famous early statistician and a very powerful advocate. She got data, she drew pictures that explained her data, and she showed them to those in authority in her day, with some vehemence, I suspect. Her work inspired me to draw the simple area diagrams that I showed earlier. And what is the significance of the science that they taught us? Darwin would tell us how evolution has matched life and its repair kit to our actual radiation and oxygen environment. Ignoring this and trying to do better with UN committees is like keeping a dog and then learning to bark yourself. But like Florence Nightingale, we should make measurements. For instance, for internal radiation that has worried many in Japan, we should compare the highest cesium-137 measurement recorded for the public, which in fact is 1,400 becquerels in the whole body, with the natural potassium in the body, which we all have and have had since the beginning of time. It's about half. Also, we should compare that 1,400 becquerels with the dose at Goiânia, which was exactly the same, but at least 10,000 times higher and without cancer in 25 years. So this must be good news. There's no chance that anybody's going to get cancer from cesium-137. And there's no chance that they will get thyroid cancer either. There's no time to go into the detail, but iodine is so plentiful in the Japanese diet, but it wasn't at Chernobyl. The release at Chernobyl was far higher than the release at Fukushima, and potassium iodide pills were not given at Chernobyl, but in many cases they were at Fukushima. Simple calculations expose the folly of the food and water regulations. On this slide I have shown what any high school student with a little half an hour of education could learn to do. Such regulations are designed to appease, but in fact what they do is create mistrust. We can compare nuclear wastes with other forms of waste. Nuclear waste is tiny in comparison with CO2 or personal waste. Nuclear waste does not spread or multiply by thermal chain reaction like fire. It cannot be caught and spread by chain reaction like disease in biological waste. Its famous chain reaction can only occur inside a working nuclear reactor. Nuclear waste is not discharged into the environment, not into the air like CO2 from fire. It is not discharged into water, or worse, like personal biological waste. It can be cooled and stored in solid or liquid form for a decade or more. Nuclear waste is 95% unused fuel, and that can be reused. Fission products are truly spent and can be separated from the actinides, as they're called, including plutonium, which have not yet been fissioned. The unused fuel and the plutonium can be reused, as I said, in a normal reactor. The actinides can be burnt up in a fast neutron reactor. Several of these have been built. The fission fragments, can be buried and are harmless in a few hundred years. This is shown on this next slide. If waste is not reprocessed and not separated into these constituents, its value is discarded and its lifetime, the lifetime for which it remains radioactive, is vastly extended. There has never been a reason to do this, but President Carter misguidedly discontinued work on fast reactors in the US in 1977 as an anti-nuclear move. In summary, there is nothing exceptional about nuclear waste, only that people are afraid of it, and their concern is completely unjustified. So what does frighten people? Well, this slide shows that displays of authority, that is dressing people up in protective suits and goggles and breathing apparatus, can frighten them. What they need is explanation and understanding. The sight of officials and politicians in protective gear digging up your children's playground is enough to put any parent to fright. People are also frightened as a result of Cold War propaganda. The friendly fire effect from fear of radiation, which we were all fed with, including me, over the years, these fears persist. They're not justified. If people are told that they have been irradiated, simple people in the countryside are told that they have been irradiated, like at Fukushima or at Chernobyl, it's like telling a medieval peasant that they have been cursed. They don't know what to do about it. They become depressed, and very often they will die. There's medical account of this sort of thing, when in fact there is nothing wrong. This is the real power of voodoo and witchcraft. The appeasement of fear with inept ALARA regulations provides a short-term sticking plaster to public worries, but in the longer term it sows distrust and misunderstanding. This mistaken strategy goes all the way up to the United Nations. It is an international, not a Japanese problem. In fact, it's not a problem, it's a crime. Fear should be treated with explanations and education, not regulation. Finally, engaging in stories of blame and secrecy are inflammatory. Technical and personal understanding are a more effective way than finding fault when something goes wrong. Finally, who still says that nuclear radiation is dangerous, and why? Well, of course, many jobs in the fossil fuel business depend on retaining the status quo. Similarly, in the regulation and safety industries, and there are many people and many jobs there. In fact, about half the cost of nuclear is safety or fear related. Half of the jobs in the industry could go with benefit. Many experts would be affected, and so they do not speak in favour of such a change. Turkeys do not vote for Christmas. Most other people remain silent. They're still influenced by the Cold War propaganda and the books and films that came with it. They're not familiar with the physical and medical science, and they believe and have been brought up to think that nuclear is very hard and not for them to understand, and they feel a bit inhibited. How about doctors? They should understand. Well, most doctors, I'm glad to say, put their patients' health first rather than making political points, and I'm glad my doctor does. Some people are frightened, genuinely. The language that they use tells that. They're based on fear, not science. There are others who are seeking or receiving compensation, and they are not going to propose any change. There are a few academics whose narrow interests, research interests, are centred on whether they can get replacement of their research grants, and they are happy with the status quo. So that doesn't leave very many of us looking at the situation as a whole. So we can come to the last slide and look at the conclusions. The first conclusion is that, very clear, that radiation is not a threat to the world order. It's not a global danger like political and economic stability, instability, environmental change, population, food, water. The second conclusion is that the UN safety guidance should be made based on science, not on appeasement. Current safety advice should be replaced to reduce nuclear costs by a large fraction. Third conclusion, education at all levels would remove the stigma of nuclear. We should build trust in science and society with explanations in simple terms. An uninformed democracy is unstable. If we give votes to people who don't understand what's going on, we're asking for trouble. Current public attitudes to nuclear safety give authoritarian regimes an advantage. Russia is building 28 reactors. 19 of those are abroad. Democracies are in danger of becoming uncompetitive. Fifth, Japan should restart its existing nuclear power plants, and closures should cease everywhere. All waste should be processed. Waste is not an exceptional danger. States should invest in more nuclear and fast reactors now, and in thorium and fusion for the future. Thank you.